The Professional Quotient podcast exists to really help people navigate the professional landscape and really put their best foot forward. And it is brought to you by a sponsor, MarketScale, that does the same thing for companies. They're empowering subject matter experts to becoming your content creators to bring your company into the 21st century. So be sure to check them out. And now we're going to have an awesome conversation with a very special guest. So on today's PQ podcast, our guest is Oren Whyche-Shaw. And I'm super excited to introduce her and have her introduce herself. But before I do, I'm just going to tell everyone where I met her, which was on a Star Trek cruise earlier this year. And yes, there is a Star Trek cruise. I had both the pleasure and privilege of attending. And just to set the scene, I was sitting by the pool, and all of a sudden I'm having this wonderful conversation with a complete stranger. And after she gets up to leave and go inside, probably the next show or whatever was happening, I had two people come up to me and say, "Oh my goodness, you were just talking to Oren. Wow, isn't she amazing?" And I was like, "Who is she?" And they said, "Oh, you need to Google her." And I said, "I can't. I don't have internet on the boat." And they were just kind of glowing and talking her praise. And I will share that I was racking my brain first to think, was she in a movie? Was she in a TV show? like, should I already know Oren? And
No.
I'm happy to say that I didn't get a chance to look up anything about Oren. I just kept getting to know her as a person on the boat. And I'm so pleased that she was kind enough to spend her time with us here on this PQ podcast to tell her story. Oren, with all of that, would you like to introduce yourself to us and what it is that you do or have done?
Okay. Well, thank you, Jason. I don't know about these glowing faces on the Star Trek cruise. I want to find out who those people are. I'm Oren Whyche-Shaw, born and raised in Philadelphia. I have had what I oftentimes characterize as a meandering career.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very high level of curiosity. And I think that has driven a lot of what I have done over the years. I might say that I also have a split brain. So on the one side, the artistic, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, the logical, the mathematical brain. So I've always tried to use the two, sometimes alternately, sometimes where I can find a way to blend the two. What have I done? I'll do it very, very succinctly. Because I have a undergraduate degree in theoretical mathematics, and I have a degree in a Bachelor of Arts in French. That's what I graduated from college. There's the split brain right there.
Right there.
And so while I had planned to go into grad school on the logical brain side as a biomedical engineering degree, I decided I wanted to stretch my little French a bit. Learning French in Ohio is not, it was very good. And, the classics I know, right? Mm-hmm. Very well, but just to practice it. So I decided, and I also wanted to see the world because I was very curious about it. So I decided I would apply to become a stewardess, not a flight attendant. That was later, but we were called stewardesses. And there were only two airlines that were flying internationally, really, on the East Coast, which is where I'm from, TWA and Pan Am. I applied to both. I was accepted by both and decided to go with Pan Am because they only flew international. There was no domestic flights.
Nice. Yeah.
So that was nice. And I did that for several years thinking, okay, I've seen a bit of the world. And so now I'm going to be serious, right? and go back and get my master's. But timing is everything. And so I was asked by Pan Am if I'd go to the Democratic Republic of Congo because they had just wet leased a Pan Am 747 and to train the crew. So all of that to say, I ended up spending 2 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Certainly got fluent in my French because I had to do everything in French.
Wow.
Came back again, a lot of it has to do with just people you meet, right? Like you were saying, people you meet.
Mm-hmm.
And so based upon that, I eventually was accepted at Columbia University for an MBA in finance, money and financial markets and international business, which I attended and graduated from. And then went to JP Morgan. I had, because of the finance, and worked at Morgan, then went into corporate America from Morgan, then was a White House fellow. I was elected a White House fellow, which was fascinating. I don't know if you're familiar with the program.
I'm not. Can you tell us about it?
White House fellow was started by Kennedy, I believe, Kennedy or Johnson. Mm-hmm. And it was to allow people who were in their mid-career in the private sector or military to actually work for a year in the government, usually with a principal, like a secretary of a department, or an administrator of an agency, mm-hmm. right? So that you would get a sense of how the government worked.
Cool.
And I was selected, worked for Jim Miller, who at the time was the head of the Federal Trade Commission.
Neat.
Did that for a year, came out. Again, things happen. I ended up going to Tunisia for 2 years with the U.S. Agency for International Development as a contractor to introduce private sector development in Tunisia and Morocco. I did that for a couple of years, came back to the States. Citi went to, was hired by Citibank as a VP to work in international investment banking. I did that for a couple of years, primarily focused on Africa and Eastern Europe. As I said, I have a meandering, right? Did that for a couple of years, and then I did something else. I don't know. No. Then I went back to West Africa, lived there again for like another 5 years, working in private sector development for Sub-Saharan Africa. Came back, went back into the private sector in Toledo, Ohio, where I was the acoustics business manager for Owens Corning, because acoustics effectively is mathematics.
Okay. Neat.
Right? Mm-hmm. Applied mathematics. Did that for a couple of years, had great fun. If it hadn't been based in Toledo, I might still be there. But Toledo was socially dead.
Okay.
And for me, at least.
Sure. Yeah.
And so eventually ended up going back to Abidjan in Ivory Coast, where I was the private sector director for the African Development Bank. Stayed there for a couple of years, got married, came back to the States, married, became the director for African nations at the Department of the Treasury, which is more of a policy macro level.
Okay.
Had great fun in that, and then was asked to transition to the U.S. Agency for International Development, where I was one of the, how would I put it, the front office for the Bureau for Africa. I was responsible initially for West Africa, which was great fun during Ebola, which I was responsible for managing.
Oh, wow.
With the interagency, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then we switched up our portfolios after Ebola, and I had Southern Africa, which I thought was going to be sort of a breeze, except that's when COVID broke out, and South Africa was the epicenter for COVID in Africa.
Oh.
And so I did that for a couple of years, running that activity. And then finally retired. At which point I had really planned to retire, but was called by the White House. They nominated me to be the U.S. representative on the board of the African Development Bank. I went through Senate confirmation and actually got through. And so moved back to West Africa to represent the United States on the board, did that for a year, and then basically came back. And so now I'm another retirement.
You're
retired again. Yes. And so that's what I've done.
That is
basically, I left out, everybody leaves out a lot of stuff, but
I think you hit enough highlights just to showcase that you have been in a lot of rooms and seen a lot of things. And I think that speaks really highly, because a lot of times within professional growth, a lot of us are not quite sure what even is available. Like, what can I do? Mm-hmm. And what I love about your story is that you started with math and French and kind of went everywhere with it. So it wasn't like you were limited by the sense that, oh, you just have a math degree or a French degree. And so, what I really like within this podcast is to showcase that lots of things are within reach. And it doesn't really necessarily matter what paperwork we have as a credential, because we can keep moving beyond that, or we can use ones, sometimes non-traditionally, and we can still grow. So out of all those different roles that you've had, let me ask, what would you say were there any roles out of all those that you had that you kind of were pinching yourself? Like, I can't believe this is what I'm doing.
That's funny. I don't know. I mean, one being, when your first job is always a pinch that you get accepted or an offer is made. So, working with Pan Am, which at the time was the U.S. flag carrier, and it was also like the height of the air industry, right? So that was sort of a pinch. I mean, I probably traveled to over 50 countries, probably more like 75 countries. And this was back when you didn't just land in London and then have an 8-hour layover and fly back. This was back in the more luxurious time where we would have, 4 days in Rio before we would fly back to New York.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, and so that was a pinch. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was a pinch to be able to experience a lot of the world before, when it was still not, I wasn't there at the time of the pioneers or when, but I look at things now and I still travel, but so much of what I saw no longer exists. Mm-hmm. So as an example, when I first started flying, and I would be flying in Africa to, say, Tanzania, they asked, I'm sure you've heard of Mount Kilimanjaro, right? Mm-hmm. That Ernest Hemingway wrote about, the snows of Kilimanjaro. I actually got to see them. Over the course of decades, the snows have basically gone. That glacier is basically gone. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the world I got to see before, say, climate change and environmental degradation, et cetera, and just population, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a good one. That was a good one for me. And also just learning how to deal with and interact with and appreciate all sorts of people, right? Because we were flying to Moscow. We were flying to Budapest. And so the people there weren't Americans sometimes. It was always a mixed bag. And so learning about their tradition, their society, trying to learn a little bit about their language, right? I mean, I still Arabia, learning some, other languages, because languages I found reflect a culture. It's not just a communication. The way languages are structured, what words are in, what words are out, has a lot to do with how the culture evolved. I mean, and I'll give an example. When I went to the Democratic Republic of Congo at the time, where I lived in Kinshasa, which is down on the Atlantic side, Lingala was the principal language. And yet in the language at the time, there was no word for please or thank you.
Okay.
Right? And so they would input the French word. So it'd be speaking, and I can't remember my Lingala now, that's been forever, but, and they would add s'il vous plaît or merci, because those concepts, and that reflected a little bit about the social dynamic, how people communicated with each other. So, yeah, I mean, so Pan Am really was an eye opener for me to the world, as well as to what's out there, right? You were saying not knowing. And I think that's still to some extent true, although with technology and the internet, folks know a lot more. But even so, I was invited a year or so ago to Amazon's robotics lab up in Boston. And the reason I was invited was because with my mathematics degree, they wanted me to talk with the fellows about how to expand beyond being a robotics expert. That what you've learned and how mathematics and physics wires your brain can be applied in a lot of other situations. So you're right. I mean, people go, they get their degree, and then they sort of plan. I mean, when I was at Columbia, the one thing I could not understand, someone who came in and who wanted to be a CPA. I mean, right? I mean, it was like, okay, but there's other, one, I wasn't going to be a CPA, but that was, they came ready and had planned out their life to be a CPA. And it's sort of like, but there's other things that you're going to run across that you might be in. In any case, there you have it. That was the pinch. For me, I guess, quite honestly, Pan Am was the pinch moment because it really opened me up to the world.
Oh, that's cool. And I appreciate hearing that. And as you were saying that, I was thinking one of my best friends is a CPA, and I'm sure she's going to hear that and be like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you play?
No, I'm not knocking. I'm not knocking CPAs. I have one, right? I have somebody, but to come in from undergrad knowing that that's what you're like, for me, I just found it somewhat limiting, on one hand. On the other hand, I guess to some extent I admired them because they knew exactly what they wanted to be, but I was still out trying to say, okay, but what about this? And what about that? and not to a large extent. I like trying things and I'm not risk averse. So if you fail, right, as one of my mentors raised when I was thinking about going to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I had never been in Africa before. I didn't know who I was going to be working with. I was going in cold. Right?
Wow. That's a big move then.
It's a huge move, right? I mean, the parachute was that I worked for Pan Am. I was on loan from Pan Am. So I always had a return ticket. Okay. I wasn't stuck there forever. And, but you don't go to some place really thinking about your return ticket. You go hoping to be reasonably successful.
Sure.
And for me, it was always, okay, if I don't like it, I will have learned something from this. And I've got my ticket back, but always willing to take the risk that, I may not be the greatest in this. Okay. But I gave it a shot.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that you had a mentor at the time that you talked with about that. Have you always had a mentor? Is that something that you acquired specifically around that time?
Not specifically around that time. I think I've been rather lucky, blessed, whatever, during my career. So whether it was teachers in middle school who encouraged me, or high school or college, that particular mentor was the CEO of General Instruments Corporation. And I met him on a flight, right when I was flying, and I was up in the lounge and I was serving, cooking and serving the meal. And we got to talking a little bit. And he finally said, "Why are you here serving me? You should be doing something with your background." And I said, "Well, I haven't decided what I want to do." He said, "Well, here's my card. If you ever want to talk about business or finance, give me a call." Right? Which I didn't take. I mean, I didn't immediately get home to my apartment, but quite honestly, I was on a flight. I can't remember. Maybe it was going to San Juan or something. And I was in the back in the economy, and the food, I was in the galley and the food was sliding all over. And I'm like, why am I doing this? I mean, it wasn't about the business thing, but Oren, you could do more than be sort of like the little garbage, like trying to put the trays back in and all that sort of stuff. So I did. I called just to explore and see, because I'd lived in New York, but I'd never been to Wall Street. I had no idea what they did. And so he said, "Send me your CV." And I said, "I don't have a CV." He said, "Well, talk to my secretary, tell her what you've done, what you've studied, and she'll pull together something. And then we'll talk." Yeah. I mean, so I've been in some ways very, very, very blessed about these things. And we had a, great conversation. I try not to be more than I am, right? I mean, to be who I am. So, we had a great conversation, and finally said, "Well, look, my background is law. I'm the CEO, and I have finance people working for me, but I have a friend. You might want to talk to him, and he'll be able to fill you in on finance, et cetera." Again, on Wall Street. And so his secretary made an appointment for me to meet this guy who was the CEO of Loeb Rhodes, I think. It was one of the boutique investment banks. And so I went and I met with him. I mean, there's lots of cute little anecdotes. I'm going to write a book someday, but I went up and, talked with him and over chicken salad sandwiches, literally. And this guy was, I think he was in the top 50 richest men in the country. I had no clue. There was no Google back then, right? And so we talked that, my interest, that. And finally he said, "So you're thinking about going to business school?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about it." He said, "Have you thought about going to Harvard?" And I said, "No, because if I go, it'll probably be one of the New York schools because I don't have the finances just to go, and I'd be working part-time with Pan Am while I go to business school." He said, "You're sure you don't want to go to Harvard?" And I said, "Well, everybody who thinks about an MBA wants to go to Harvard, but nah, I have to, figure out how I'm going to do this." And he said, "Okay, well, if you need a reference, I'm more than happy to write one for you." So I, not knowing I truly just, walking through this stuff. And so I applied to Columbia, I applied to NYU, and I was accepted at Columbia. And a couple of days before school was to start, I was asked to come in by the financial aid director who wanted to talk with me because I had gotten the first Citibank fellowship at Columbia. Okay. So they were picking up the tab. He said, "I could have sent you a letter." He said, "But I just wanted to meet the person who got a reference letter from John Loeb and who didn't go to Harvard." And I said, "Well, I talked with him and how." He said, have you heard of the Loeb Center at Harvard? Have you heard I mean, this guy and his family had been huge contributors at Harvard, right? I had no clue. Again, no Google. I had no clue. And so I said, no. He said, look, you were worried about finance. You had gone to Harvard. There would have been no problem with finance. And I said, well, there you go. I didn't know. Right. But as it was, it worked out because I did work part-time. Not part-time. I worked full-time as a stewardess while going to Columbia full-time and maintaining my grade point to maintain the fellowship from Citibank. Yeah. Very nice. I mean, again, I was very lucky. Business schools at that time had one day that was a reading day during the week. Columbia's reading, I think Harvard's is Wednesday or was Wednesday. Columbia's was Friday, right? Where in theory, you're supposed to be in the library working on projects, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I would do would be to go to class Monday through Thursday. And then Thursday evening, I'd fly out to Copenhagen with my books, right? And I do a 4-day and I turn around, come back, be in the class on Monday. So no one ever knew I was flying full time until finals, my second year, where I had to fly out the same day. I was scheduled for finals for some of the final tests, right? And so I went dashing to Columbia the day before my final, those finals I was to take. No, I actually went the day of the final. It was the finance final. And I had a flight leaving that evening, right? And so I literally came in my uniform and my bags because I was going to have to leave Columbia and head out to JFK and track down my professors to say, look, can I have an extension for my exams? Because I was going to be gone a week, right? Can I have an extension on my exams? Because I'm not going to be in the city. I mean, you can see I'm flying out tonight. And I think these guys were so, because they were all guys at the time, but I think they were so amazed that I'd been working full time. You're not supposed to work when you go to business school, but I was working full time and still, making my grades and all that sort of stuff. They just sort of said, yeah, okay.
Nice.
When do you get back? Right. So there you have it.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And I just have to say, I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to reach out to somebody, even if you had a good conversation with them and they gave you your number while on the Pan Am flight, to be able to take that step after the flight at whatever moment that you finally did. Were you nervous initially picking up the phone and calling your mentor before? Yeah.
Oh, back to my mentor.
Yeah.
So I had gone through all of this, was working at JP Morgan and working still with that Pan Am. And it was supposed to be a 3-month secondment down to the DRC. And I was getting close to graduating. And I had a meeting with him in his office. And he said, and I told him that I was thinking about putting, a postponement so that I could. And he said, Oren, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. You are going to be you'll be out of view, right? You are going to be off somewhere in Africa. People are very ambitious. You're going to lose opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, yeah. In terms of my career, right? Sure. He was thinking in terms of, and yes, I was nervous, but on the other hand, as I told him, well, some bank will hire me if when I come back in 3 months. But this, when will I get an opportunity to go and work in a foreign country in a foreign language? Yeah. And so he said, well, that's on you, but I wouldn't recommend it. Right. Oh, yeah. Monty said, no, I wouldn't recommend that. But, You got to live your life.
But you did it anyway. So you knew deep down, no, this is a move for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, you're always nervous when you're going off.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, that 3-month secondment ended up being 2 years because they kept extending my contract down there.
Wow.
And as a result, I got to work on the Ali Foreman fight, right? The Rumble in the Jungle. I mean, so things just happen, and I think you just have to be open to opportunities and knowing what might make sense for you. Right. And having some ability to accept risk.
Sure. I mean, taking those risks in a very short way to say it, you went from flight attendant to like U.S. ambassador.
Well, it wasn't short, but yes.
No, I mean, my words, just being able to say from here to here, you had a huge career in that. But that's not, I would say that probably most people that started off as flight attendants, stewardesses, whichever term we want to use for that now, aren't necessarily seeing a career that takes them there.
There's some women who I know. I mean, at the time, you had to have a degree, right, to work for Pan Am. You had to speak another language. So I would say that the caliber was slightly higher when I was flying. And there are lawyers and others who left also, who have their PhDs, et cetera. So maybe not a lot of them have the rank of ambassador, but people were doing stuff, right?
Sure, absolutely. I think that's really, really cool. Along the way, many of us within our careers will face challenges that have come up. Are you comfortable sharing any challenges that you had in your career path and what you did to overcome or circumnavigate those challenges?
Sure. I can share one or two.
Sure. Yeah.
When I was at JP Morgan, and the way it works is, the bank would hire this cohort. And Morgan at the time was one of it still is the biggest, but with Chase, but it was a very exclusive bank, right? So it basically went to the Ivy Leagues and Stanford, maybe Duke. There may have been one or two people from Duke. And you would go through a training program. And this is after you've had gotten your MBA, because Morgan did things the way Morgan did them.
Oh, okay.
And so they wanted to make sure you understood how Morgan did it. And also the ethics, right, of Morgan. With respect to the ethics, Morgan banked when I was there, they banked the top 50 largest companies in the United States with the exception of one.
Oh.
Because they didn't like their business practices.
Wow. Okay.
In terms of a challenging situation, after you finish the class, then you're assigned to one of the departments, right? And based upon how you performed, if you were truly exceptional, there was one guy in our class who was so exceptional that it was like, okay, you take the house accounts, General Motors, GM, GMAC. I mean, but the rest of us were, okay. So I had part of New York City and New Jersey. And so among my clients were Metropolitan Life and Amex and Beth Steel and Campbell Soup and,
just a few names.
I mean, no, but I'm saying that's who banked with Morgan at the time. And I'm sure they still do. And so you are their banker and you do deals with them and you meet with the treasurer or the VP finance and, you manage that relationship, those relationships. And then after, I think, a year or so, everyone is up for promotion. And whether or not, so it's sort of anxious. Am I going to become an assistant treasurer? Right. Because that was the ranking, assistant treasurer, then vice president. And so when it came time for the promotions, I wasn't promoted. And so I went to my boss. I was bold back then. When I think about it. So I went to my boss when I heard that I had not been promoted. And I asked him, did you not think I was, qualified, or my work had not warranted my being promoted to assistant treasurer? Because some of the people in my class were, right? And so he said, no, I put your name forward to his boss, who was a vice president. He said, no, I anticipated that you were going to be promoted. And so I said, well, thank you, because I wasn't. And then I went to his boss. And I said, I just talked with my boss. And he said that he had proposed me for this promotion to you, and that he didn't know why I wasn't promoted. And so I'm here to ask, did you think I wasn't quite ready to be promoted? All the little questions like that. And Bill said at the time it was Bill. Bill said, no, I put your name up to the senior vice president. Right. And so I said, really? He said, oh yeah, I don't understand this either. Now, I will caveat this by saying at the time, JP Morgan maybe had 10 non-administrative bankers that were of color.
Okay.
Right? I mean, literally, I'm probably exaggerating, maybe even 10. But let's say 10, or let's say 20 with the international offices.
Okay.
Maybe.
We'll be generous.
We'll be generous. And not that I thought that was a reason, but I just wanted to know why. So I made an appointment to meet with the senior vice president, who actually makes the cut, right? He makes the decision. And, a day or two when I had my meeting with him, I went into his office and he said, so Oren, how can I help you? And I said, well, I'm here because my understanding is that my name was put forward to be promoted, and that it had gotten up to you from Bill. And I just didn't understand why. And I just wanted to understand why I wasn't promoted. And he said, well, these guys will say that they did it, but, I said, okay, all right, but they did put it forward. So, and I had a good relationship with those guys. I said, so what could I do to be promoted the next time? To, to make sure, because it's every. And he said, and I'm cutting all of this short, it's a longer conversation, but he basically said, no, you're doing all the right stuff. I said, no. Did you get complaints from Metropolitan Life, from Campbell, from Beth Steele, from any of my clients, from some of the banks, Mid-Atlantic Bank, et cetera? And he said, no, but you're just keep doing what you're doing. To which I said, I was really bold back then. I said, clearly doing what I've been doing didn't get me the promotion. So what can I do differently?
Yeah.
And I said it firmly, but not.
Sure.
And he said, well, no, just, you're doing a good job. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I said, okay, well, thank you very much. And I left the meeting and I walked back down to my desk and I called HR and said, look, I don't know what's going on. However, I do not want that particular person to be at the top of the chain when my name comes up again for a promotion. Now, this is where the era, the time is different, I think, than it is now.
Okay.
Right? Because within a week, they had moved me to a different department.
Wow.
I don't know if that could happen now, quite honestly. I mean, you might be considered more of just a troublemaker. I don't know.
Perhaps.
Right?
I mean, I can see that. Was that a good solution for you to be moved, or was it a little like, why do I have to be moved if...
Oh, no.
Okay.
It was good for me. It was like, because this senior vice president was not moving. So if he's the one that's going to make the decision about my promotion, then I want someone else.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. To be at the top of that line.
Fair enough.
Because he had been there for like 20. I mean, I'm not going up against him.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you.
And so they did move me. And this, it would be great if in fact, when the next promotion period came up, I could say I was promoted. But before that even happened, a recruiter came and recruited me to I think it was the 14th largest company in the United States to run all their banking. So all of a sudden I was on the other side of the table.
I love when earthly matters close doors on us and then the heavens just open up a giant window that we can come through. And that sounds awesome. And I
want to say that when I was having those conversations, it wasn't that I wasn't nervous. I was, but I also felt that I had to stand up for myself. Right. And so however nervous I was going to at least make the effort, right, to do it. That I felt I was in my right to do it, however nervous. And they could have fired me. I mean, and that would have been another outcome. But luckily it was not.
What do you do when you are nervous to have a conversation, but need to have it anyway? Like, do you pep talk yourself? Do you just acknowledge that you're nervous and keep moving forward? What does Oren do in those situations?
First, recognizing that I need to have the conversation. Right. And why? So I will tend to step back.
Okay.
Breathe. Literally. And the step back could be a day or two.
Okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? While I'm thinking it through and understanding my reaction and why my reaction, and then being able to have a conversation that is very clear, cogent, right? Not necessarily emotional, right? And one of the things when I was at Morgan that they taught us was when you go to a customer, one of these big clients, and we're structuring a deal, you're presenting this deal to them. Understanding all of the context before you go in, when you're structuring the deal, so that when you present it, they're going to have to figure out why they should say no.
Oh, I like that.
And that has held me in good stead. That think it through first. Don't react. Right. And the no could be, thank you, but now I'm going to move on to a new boss or whatever. But just stepping back and understanding why your reaction, which oftentimes can be emotional as well as anything else. But trying to say, okay, but why? What are the options that I want to pursue? Right. And what are the options the other person has? And so when you go in, hopefully you understand their context such that they're going to have to figure out why they should say no.
That's deep. I like that. I mean, that's a really good, you pause to reflect and then you react with intention when you're ready. is
Right.
what I heard through that. And
Yeah.
that's very powerful.
Yeah.
Because even though we are emotional beings, and there's no fault in that, you are absolutely within your rights to have all the emotions you can have in scenarios, it doesn't necessarily serve us when we react with our emotions, unfortunately, in conversations, because a lot of times it brings a level of noise to the conversation where then people are reacting to your reaction rather than engaging with your intention. And so I like that you shared that, because I feel like that's very, very good response, very good response. And I think a lot of us are sometimes put in situations where we don't know how to respond, when we might have an unfair boss or a toxic environment, and we need to do something, but we don't know what it is. And a lot of times we are trapped in our emotions on it, where it's, I want to react, but I don't want to call up my boss and just be crying my eyes out or yelling or whatever. And so I like your approach is to step back and think, what is it that they can do? What can I do? And then
Right.
let's do this.
And even before that, the stepping back and hoping that you can understand why you reacted. What was it? Was it the tone? Right? Was it the personality because you've had this toxic relationship with the person for a while? Is it trust or lack thereof? Excuse me. So for me, that's, if I can figure that out, then I can start thinking about how do I approach this? Sure.
I like that. When it comes to professional quotient, we like to say on this show that it's we raise our PQ by how we're engaging the elements of our professional equity, or our portfolio of our skills, our knowledge, our education, our experiences, and our community. With those things in mind, what would you say have served you as the most valuable parts of your PQ?
All of them.
And I've heard that through your stories today. Like, I heard you engaging community through the people that you've met along the way, through your mentors and bosses.
Right.
And even having
colleagues.
Absolutely. Colleagues lift us up a lot. I'm a huge proponent in making sure we are making the best of our engagements and our relationships with people, no matter where they're from, whether they're direct colleagues or supervisors or somebody in a whole different department or a whole different business. Like, I feel like we lift each other up, and that's how we all do better. And it sounds like you have been doing that. Even in your work in Africa, it sounds like you are really helping to lift up economies. And I think
individuals, I mean, ideally, if you're doing something that you're interested in, and it has, for me, it has the effect of being positive to individuals first, as well as systems, etc., then that's the best, right? I mean, and it's not, as someone who has managed large numbers of people, certainly in the latter part of my career, is making time and making sure that the folks who work for you know your door is open. Whether they want to come in to talk about a change, they want to move on, whether they're having some challenges with colleagues or whatever, their bosses. And if you can help them to think it through, I mean, sometimes you have to do direct intervention. I prefer not to do that, but sometimes you have to.
Sure.
That's the best mix, right?
Are there activities you continue to do to keep raising up your professionalism, keeping yourself sharp?
You're assuming I was sharp to begin with. But
oh, I know you're sharp.
But yes, I mean, and I'm in the process of trying to figure out what I really sort of want to focus on.
Sure.
One, I was selected as the STEM ambassador for my high school, which is in Philadelphia. It's the Philadelphia High School for Girls. And it's one of the oldest high schools in the country, 1848.
Whoa, wow.
Yeah. So I've been working to give back and expose the girls or the opportunities. That's one.
Neat.
I have been on the board of the USAID Alumni Association.
Okay.
Which during this past 6-7 months, especially, has been particularly challenging, as you might imagine, given the closing down effectively of USAID, the recalling of staff from all over the world into a highly uncertain environment for them, as well as, career wise, even health insurance wise, housing wise. It's been so working with my colleagues on the board and beyond. That's something I've been working on. And then because it's sort of slipped out that I have some knowledge of Africa and the private sector and development and those types of things, I have been contacted by individuals who want advice on deals or projects they're interested in putting together and, those types of things. So, yeah, I've been, as well as trying to stay healthy,
Absolutely.
working.
Yeah. It sounds like retirement isn't very relaxing. It sounds like you're still doing a lot.
Well, that's interesting you say that. One of my directors, when he found out that I had been confirmed by the Senate, right? Mark called me and said, "Oren, you are a complete failure at retirement." And so I said, well, I never thought of I don't even know what it means to be retired.
Sure.
I've been on the Star Trek cruise. Those were the first cruises I've ever been on.
Same. Yes.
But I'm not someone who wants to do cruises every, twice a year. Now maybe that's because I've been to, at this juncture, over 100 countries.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
And so going to islands like Puerto Rico or Coco Cay, that's nice, but been there, done that.
Yeah.
So it's not sort of, I like to stay involved and my interests are astronomy and space and STEM, and Africa.
Yeah.
And climate change and the environment. So, yeah, I said, as I started out, I have a very curious mind.
I like that. I like that a lot. Now, if somebody were, maybe let's say they're starting in their career, maybe they're still in school and they're hearing this interview and they're thinking, wow, I want to be an Oren when I grow up. Or we could phrase it the other way. If you were giving advice to yourself when you're that age, starting out, what advice would you give to someone?
Well, that's interesting, especially in this new era. And it is, from my perspective, a new era.
It is. Right? It's a new. Yeah.
Again, I think the knowing yourself, feeling reasonably comfortable about yourself. What are the cost benefits that you're willing to look at, right? Because I think there are going to be challenges, definitely going to be challenges for people starting out in their career. I think the foundation is you. Money doesn't drive everything. It's important, obviously. You want to have shelter and food and all that sort of stuff. But what is actually going to make you happy? And I don't mean like doing cartwheels. But when you wake up in the morning, it's not like, oh, I got to go to work. Right. I rarely have had that experience. Even if it isn't a high flying type of job. Right. Because I've heard that if you enjoy what you're doing, you'll be more successful and are helping people, hopefully, in that. You'll be successful. Right. So if I were starting out, I would definitely want to understand the landscape that we're now in, which is different than when I was. There were no question. There were enormous challenges being Black, being a woman, going into a field that was really predominantly, and JP Morgan was like at the pinnacle, right, of the white male dominant finance institution in the States. Enjoying people and understanding, trying to listen and understand people, the person across from you, and what's driving them, right? Not necessarily trying to please them or make them feel, that I'm the right person because, no, if you are the right person, then the conversation should flow relatively naturally, I would think. If you have questions or some concerns, raise them up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And I'm saying this because I can say it from hindsight.
Yes.
I know it's harder when you're starting out.
Mm-hmm.
I got that. I really, really do. But I think at least being grounded in who you are and what will give you the feeling of waking up in the morning and being excited to go. And all jobs have challenges. I'm not saying
sure. Yeah.
But it shouldn't be drudgery. Take risks, calculated risks.
I like that.
But understand what the risk is, not just look at what the benefit is, but what the risk is. And enjoy life.
Absolutely. And one additional last minute thing I like to give for every guest is the opportunity to spotlight or highlight anything that my guest would like to shine a light on. Is there something that you would like to shine a light on or shine a spotlight on something?
That's unfair, Jason. You should have given me some prep for that. Off the top of my head. What would I like to shine a light on? Well, that's interesting. Maybe two things.
Go for it. Yes.
Maybe. Folks should be aware that just about every empire, of which one could say, Pax Americana has been the most recent empire, tend to follow a normal curve. So if you look at the Egyptians, 7,000 plus years, they were on the top, right? They dominated. And it has shrunk. That x-axis has continually gotten shorter to the point that at the beginning of the Second World War, Britain had an empire where the sun never set. And that was probably at that point, I'm guessing, please don't, some data nerd out there is going to say, no, it wasn't this, but I'm just giving a guesstimate.
Yeah.
For the sun never set empire, it probably was 350 years, maybe 4. And so as a trend, empires are having shorter and shorter lives.
Mm-hmm.
I've grown up in the Pax Americana, right? Which came really into play after the Second World War.
Mm.
So let's say 1949, 1950. And we are now 2024. So we probably have had a good run for 100, 100. I'm not saying that the U.S. is going down the tubes. I'm just saying from a historical perspective, it's useful to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would put a light on that. And then the other thing is climate change and the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I know these may not be the types of light things, but
I like for our guests to spotlight everything that's important to them. Not everything, what is important to them, because this also shows the dynamic of who we are. We're not cookie cutters. We're not like, oh, there's just let's print another Oren or another Jason. We don't do that. We each have our passions and our flavors and our things. And so, and I'm a huge sustainability nerd myself. I had a YouTube channel for years called Green Tip Guy, and I was sharing little tips on how people could, because a lot of people would say, well, I can't concern myself about the climate because I can't afford to put solar panels on my house. And I was thinking, well, then don't put solar panels, but start with, putting stuff in a recycling bin.
Yeah.
Like there's small steps, and there's a lot of small steps we can take. And so I too follow that passion, like big time. I don't know why I'm doing this on passion, but I guess that's Star Trek, sustainability, theology. Yeah. These are like what get me excited. So yeah, I'm here for it. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the other one would be the climate is changing. This is the anthropological era now, right? That human beings are affecting it. And sometimes you hear people say that, I think, well, one, obviously climate change and environmental degradation, et cetera, I think is fundamental to the survival of humanity. I don't think that even going into space, you can't get enough people into space to offset that. And at the end of the day, if we ruin our ability to survive on this planet, the planet will survive. It's just us. So that's another one. I mean, so to the extent that we can do whatever we can to offset some of the damage that we're doing, not even in terms of, devastation, but just in terms of how our health is getting worse. I mean, because of how we're eating and those types of things. And I was very lucky as my cousin. I will leave it with this. My cousin, and this is a terrible thing to say for you, but my cousin always tells me, Oren, I'm glad I was in my prime when I was in my prime. Because it was up of the normal curve, right? Mm-hmm. And right now we seem to be on the downward slope and accelerating. So
it's a weird place we find ourselves in, for sure. And for those that will sometimes argue that maybe we aren't impacting climate as much, I would counter that with, not only are we finding evidence of it now, we can even historically look back and see images of like the Dust Bowl in the US, where we farmed a territory so incorrectly that we've been seeing impact of human activities for a while now. So I'm definitely in the camp of we should do what we can do to mitigate that and be stewards of the planet, be friends with it. Like I also come from a heavy theological background. So I come from a belief system that humankind wasn't made so that we can devour the earth, but to work in harmony with it. So that also shapes the way I come into that conversation. But I'm definitely in the camp of we should be trying to do what we can do. And there's some things outside of our control, of course. There's always others. There's always bigger things, like if a volcano goes off and emits a lot
Well,
of
yes. I mean, a
okay, we can't do
volcano,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
The traps in India, if they go off again, that's the end of it. I mean, obviously there are things out of our control, but the fact that most Americans, many human beings now have microplastics in their body is not a good thing, right? I mean, so there are things we can do to reduce some of that. Yeah. I mean, and the other thing is, and I'm not pushing for necessarily Planned Parenthood, but when I was born, there were 3 billion people on the planet. There are over 8 billion now. The resources have not expanded. And so again, taking that into consideration, how should we be being better stewards given the greater demand for what the earth provides, I think is very important. And that I'm going to stop with that one.
I love that, Oren. That just resonates so strongly with me. And I'm so thankful that you responded when I reached out and asked you to be on this podcast. Like, I really was in my mind going, she's probably not going to remember me, and she might think this is spam, which is why I threw a lot of live long and prosper signs into my message. Very much appreciate your time, Oren. And to our listeners out there today, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave a positive review. And remember that unlike our IQ or our EQ, we can really easily raise our PQ every single day. Just keep learning, building, and connecting. Absolutely. Until next time.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. I love it. Yes.